Good afternoon. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Melanie Fitzpatrick with the Center for Food Integrity, and on behalf of CFI and the United Soybean Board, thank you for joining us today for Demand Grows: How Biodiesel Can Fuel Food Sustainability. As you know, the food industry is under increasing pressure to meet ambitious global sustainability goals and ESG commitments. Certainly, fuel used throughout the supply chain is an important part of that equation. Either the fuel a company uses directly or the fuel used by vendors throughout the value chain. Greenhouse gas emissions are classified as scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions. This terminology comes from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, a widely used greenhouse gas accounting standard. Scope 1 is about emissions that a company directly owns or controls. For example, burning fuel in their own fleet of vehicles. Scope 2 involves indirect emissions from purchased energy. This includes electricity, heating, and cooling. Scope 3 involves all other emissions associated with the company's activities. This is what you might call third-party emissions and can include transportation, distribution, waste, energy and fuel, and travel. It's also the sustainability impact of your suppliers. So, for food manufacturers, it includes growing crops and moving them from point A to point B. The use of biodiesel can help food companies address scope 1 emissions and has an even wider impact on their scope 3 emissions. If those scope 3 emissions across the value chain that the food companies are working hard to get a handle on. For soy biodiesel, the sustainability benefits of the fuel itself are also backed up by the sustainability practices that U.S. soybean farmers use to produce it. Those are some of the reasons demand continues to grow for biodiesel, a renewable alternative made largely from soy, which more companies and municipalities are leveraging to lower their carbon footprint. Today, we have 4 panelists joining us to talk about soy biodiesel. Specifically, we'll discuss Biodiesel 101, what is it and why is demand increasing? The benefits of biodiesel for our health and our planet. The sustainability practices on today's soybean farms that make soy biodiesel an even better choice for sustainability. And the story of how a Chicago school bus company has been using biodiesel to benefit the children, the company, and our planet for nearly 20 years. So let's meet our presenters for today, beginning with Veronica Bradley. Veronica serves as the Director of Environmental Science for Clean Fuels Alliance America, where she leads the advancement of education and research on the climate and public health benefits of bio-based diesel and sustainable aviation fuels. In this role, Veronica educates various stakeholders about the environmental benefits of clean fuels and works with industry to identify and execute relevant research needs. This work ensures that the products of her feedstock and producer members are accurately assessed for their climate benefits and are appropriately accounted for in reporting by end users and policymakers. We'll also hear from Nancy Cabazanjian. Nancy grew up in a New York suburb, but today farms with her husband Charles near Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. Nancy is involved in the day-to-day management of their 2,000-acre family row crop farm. Their operation emphasizes preserving the soil and managing resources in a sustainable manner. In fact, in 2020, Nancy and her husband were honored with the American Soybean Association's National Conservation Legacy Award, and they have been a finalist for Wisconsin's Leopold Conservation Award the past 2 years. Nancy currently sits on the USB board. Next, we'll talk with Ed Lammers. A USB director from Hartington, Nebraska, Ed grows soybeans, corn, alfalfa, and rye, and also raises cattle. Ed serves in the officer role of secretary on the United Soybean Board. Ed started farming with his dad more than 40 years ago and today farms with his son. In addition to his role at USB, he's involved in the U.S. Meat Export Federation and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Ed believes strongly in on-farm innovation to produce more using less, and hopes to turn over the reins of his farm to his son and continue the family legacy of sustainability. And finally, we'll hear from John Benish Jr. John is president and CEO of Cook Illinois Corporation. the largest family-owned and operated bus contractor in the US, and the 6th largest school bus company in the nation. John's company is fueled by biodiesel. He has more than 25 years of experience in the school transportation business, starting as a teenager and working nearly every position in the company. John also pioneered the company's groundbreaking moves toward greener transportation, including being the first in Illinois to voluntarily switch an entire bus fleet to biodiesel fuel. Before we begin, a quick housekeeping note. If you have questions for our presenters today, please submit them via the Q&A feature on your screen, and we'll save time at the end of the webinar to get as many answered as we can. With that, let's kick things off with Veronica from Clean Fuels Alliance America for Biodiesel 101, what it is, how it's used, and some of the benefits of biodiesel, both for our health and the environment.
Well, thank you, Melanie. And thank you to CFI and USB for giving me the opportunity today to talk about biodiesel. Biodiesel is a renewable and biodegradable fuel that's made from vegetable oils like soy, canola, and corn oil, and animal fats and used cooking oil. And it's a really simple chemical reaction to make the fuel. You basically take those feedstock oils and mix them with alcohol to get a diesel-like fuel that you then blend with petroleum-based or renewable diesel to get your final product that goes into your vehicles and equipment. And I think at this point, it's important to note that while I think the average person thinks about using fuel and diesel in your car or your truck for your personal use, biodiesel's uses are much larger than that. So they're not just for on-road vehicles, and that's a big part of the market, which John will tell us about. But you can also use it in home heating and electricity generation, as well as in marine and rail applications and off-road equipment, like in farming. Next slide, please. So what makes biodiesel such a great product? So biodiesel and other clean fuels are good for our farmers, our communities, our economy, and our planet. So they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Biodiesel reduces greenhouse gas emissions by about 74% relative to petroleum diesel. And beyond the climate benefits, you also get a cleaner burning fuel, which is great for our health. So using a B100 blend, or just 100% biodiesel, can reduce particulate matter emissions by about 45%, which is great for urban areas where we have, pollution problems that can contribute to asthma or other respiratory diseases. And, these environmental benefits, these health benefits are so true that the American Lung Association has actually endorsed biodiesel as a healthy fuel that limits respiratory disease. And I would also be remiss at this point not to mention, when I said biodiesel and clean fuels, other clean fuels, there's also a difference between biodiesel and renewable diesel, which you may have heard before. And our members do produce renewable diesel, which provides the same climate benefits or similar climate benefits as biodiesel, being made from the same feedstocks that I mentioned before. But it is chemically more similar to biodiesel. So you can actually take biodiesel and blend it with renewable diesel and have this 100% alternatively sourced fuel. So you can really maximize your greenhouse gas benefits. So if we think about the demand for biodiesel, next slide, please. The demand is really skyrocketing in my humble opinion. So I most recently came from the aviation industry, joining Clean Fuels. And so as a former end user of clean fuels, thinking about where the trajectory of these fuels are, biodiesel is going to go through the roof, right? So back in 2020, Clean Fuels, then the National Biodiesel Board, came up with the Vision 2020 to double the demand for biodiesel and renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuels from 3 billion gallon market to a 6 billion gallon market by 2030. And the demand is certainly going to get here before 2030. And I think the supply is too, given what we see happening in the markets. So one of the things that people talk about and think about around kind of the reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in transportation in particular is electrification, right? And so some people say, well, why are we talking about biodiesel when everything's going to be electric? And, going electric is great. And I think for, applications like light duty vehicles, the regular cars and trucks that we drive around ourselves, electrification is certainly a great answer. But there are applications that it's going to be more of a challenge to electrify. And certainly my past in aviation is a great example of that, where the liquid fuels have so much more energy density that you're getting a lot more bang for your weight buck, if you will. So, in aviation, you certainly can't risk more weight in order to, get off the ground, right? So similarly, in other applications where you need that extra power, like in medium and heavy duty trucking, in off-road equipment, in marine and rail, as I mentioned, you really need extra power. And so liquid fuels like biodiesel are a great option to be able to maintain that extra power while also getting the climate benefits. And it's an option that you can do today. So some of the things as just kind of a last thing to address in being able to do this today, right, is, well, can I really do it today? Or are there other things that are preventing me from just taking up biodiesel and using it? And these are some of the common myths that I think people need to hear are not true, right? So if you could advance to the next slide, just in case there are any questions that people have and want to get in contact with me as I kind of approach this last piece. So some folks think, biodiesel is not a high quality fuel, but that's certainly not the case. So you don't have any worries about putting biodiesel in your equipment today. The fuel has to meet certain specifications from the American Society for Testing and Materials to ensure the fuel quality, so it's safe and effective in your equipment and your vehicles. And one of the things that I actually didn't know before joining Clean Fuels was that biodiesel actually has higher cetane. So you get increased fuel economy, you get fewer emissions, both those, the benefit of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also those particulate matter emissions and other what we call criteria pollutants, or those nasty health impact emissions, as well as you get that better power output. So there are additional benefits to using biodiesel. And the other myth that I think I've heard is, you have to do something to your equipment or your vehicles. You have to install some sort of infrastructure or equipment to make it take biodiesel, when that's not true. There is no retrofitting needed. As I mentioned, you can blend biodiesel. Most applications are approved up to a 20% blend today, but our team at Clean Fuels is working really hard with engine manufacturers to get them on board to make sure that higher blends up to B100 are available to get those extra benefits, and at the same time, ensure that they won't do any adverse damage to equipment or engines or anything like that. So I think John will also mention that today. So I look forward to hearing what he has to say, as well as what Ed and Nancy will be sharing on specific to the soy impact there. So if there are any other questions, my email address is up there, so feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Veronica. Now let's turn our attention to the farm and hear from Nancy Cabazanjan in Wisconsin.
Thank you, Melanie. And as we know, the sustainability of biodiesel does go all the way back to the farm. And it starts with us planting the seed. And it's not just soybeans that we grow on our farm. So you won't find farms that are monocropping soybeans in the United States. We rotate our crops so that some of our fields are in soybeans, some of them are in corn, and some of them are in wheat each year. This is just a beautiful picture showing our soybeans emerging out of the field with a lot of residue from the past crop in the middle there. That helps us to keep the weed pressures down. When we're rotating our crops, we have fewer pest control concerns, so we're using fewer chemicals to control those pests. It spreads out the workload, And another thing that we work really hard to try and get wheat into our rotation so that we have 3 different years that we're rotating our crops. And what the wheat allows us to do is to use more cover crops. Now, you may have heard a little bit about cover crops. A cover crop is a crop that we don't intend to harvest. We plant it to protect the soil, to add organic matter, to keep the soil covered so that we're not eroding it with the wind and the heavy rains that we've been getting a lot lately as the climate seems to be changing and we get these heavy rainstorms. Rather than just a nice gentle overnight rain, we may get 3 or 4 inches of rain. So we plant these cover crops because the wheat comes off in July and they're able to get established. And you'll see here, we like flowers. So we always put some sunflowers in with our cover crops. They do have they do add some root cover, but mostly they just make it look pretty. And one of the things we're also trying to do this year to be even more sustainable is to grow our own nitrogen fertilizer. We do use cow manure when we can get it from our neighbors, when we test, and we also supplement with purchased nitrogen. Nitrogen has gotten very expensive. So we're looking to grow our own nitrogen by planting more legumes, which fix the nitrogen. So more peas, more alfalfa, more clovers into our cover crops. We also put a bigger tuberous cover crop, a turnip and a radish that help break up the soil. And together they all work really well to help us to have really healthy soils. And healthy soils means we can grow healthier crops on them. One of the things that we have about 15 acres of cover crops. We use the cover crops after wheat. But the other thing we do is we use similar plants to, this is a picture, I'm sorry, I forgot to have this picture of our corn. So as I said, we don't just grow soy, but we also grow corn. And you can see the corn plants coming up into the cover crop that had been there. Most of our covers don't survive the winter. So you'll see in the spring when we go in and we plant, the cover crop is dead. And then the green plant grows up from it. One of the other things we are really trying hard to do is to find places to put perennial crops. So we have a lot of rolling ground in Wisconsin. And on that rolling ground, it just doesn't, we can't always on the top of hills or in a wet area, we can't support the growing crop of whether it's corn or soybeans or wheat. So we have established some pollinator habitats. And those pollinator habitats consist of perennial plants, flowers, sedges, grasses that come up year after year. This is a picture of our infield pollinator habitat. They have a lot of asters in there. We also have some beautiful yellow flowers. They look pretty, but what they do is bring our pollinators in, and they're in areas of the field where we can't grow a crop, as I've said. We've got pollinator habitat on about 5 or 6 different fields with 4 or 5 acres each. So they're in blocks, and they not only add to the wildlife area, they bring the bees and the butterflies and the birds in, they beautify the area. And one of the other things we're doing with our perennial crops now is to put them in strips around sloping areas. So we have a lot of drumlins in Wisconsin, which are big sloping areas. And we've made wide strips of about 120 feet long on the contour around the hills with these perennial plants. They hold the soil in place. They stop the water erosion. They also add pollinators and they add beauty to the landscape. And again, all these things work to help us enrich our soils because the motto for our farm is our soil, our strength. So we know if we have good, strong soils, we also have more sustainable crops, and the sustainable crops add to your sustainable biodiesel.
And Nancy, you use solar energy too, don't you? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we added about 4 years ago, we added these solar panels on a waste area on their farm. That was an area we had filled in, so it couldn't support a crop because it was all landfill. But we put this solar array in, and it actually powers the shop that you see behind it. And it provides electricity. It's connected to the grid. So when we're using electricity, it will help power that electricity, and otherwise it will send it to the grid. And what this does is, it does make us more sustainable. And we like it so much that we're going to add another one to help power our house. And before we had the solar array, we also had a personal wind energy system for about 10 years. It was just a small wind energy system, and that worked really well as well to offset some of our electrical needs.
Thank you. And when we were planning this webinar, Nancy, you mentioned that you and your husband believe in the 3 pillars of sustainability. Tell us more about those and how your family lives those pillars on your farm.
Sure, I love to talk about that, because when we think about sustainability, we do think about the environmental things, the carbon offsets, the emissions, but those things, when we do them, also help us economically. So the first 2 pillars are environment and economics. But we don't want to forget about the 3rd pillar, which is the community stewardship. And every year, for probably a dozen years, we've planted several acres of sweet corn, and we started donating them to local food pantries. Well, pretty soon we had so much sweet corn, we didn't know what to do with it. We started going further than our local food pantries. We went to Madison, Wisconsin, which is about 40 miles away, and then to inner city Milwaukee. We found this wonderful homeless sanctuary on the north side of Milwaukee, where we are taking pickup loads of sweet corn. And that actually blossomed into more than just sweet corn. So we will take them excess eggs that we get, and anything from our local food pantries. When they have too much, we take them down, and we're there almost once a week delivering eggs, cheese, milk, ice cream this summer, melons and vegetables. Anything that anybody donates to us, we pass it along. So we want to remember that there are 3 pillars to sustainability. It's not just the environment, but it's also the economics. I wouldn't be here for 40 years farming if I wasn't making money, and the fact that we do share with our community.
Thank you, Nancy. That was really inspiring. So now let's move from Wisconsin to Nebraska, where Ed Lammers farms near Hardington. So Ed, tell us some of the sustainable practices on your farm.
Thanks, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. As a 5th generation farmer, I'm excited, and I feel compelling to share my story of my years of sustainability. So bear with me. 30 years ago, we started going to no-till. So with that, we had less soil erosion, and also, what another benefit is you have less evaporation of that ground if you leave it, if you don't disturb it. So we were saving soil and saving water. 20 years ago, I had made a decision to invest in GPS, which that allowed us to measure more precisely what crops were coming out in certain locations. But not only that, we were taking soil samples and measuring both what was in the soil, what the soil was producing. So we got a better understanding of how much thicker we could plant our population, our seed, or how less amount of seed in certain areas. But not only that, fertilizer too. So we're constantly trying to maximize our crop production. And the new data or the new technologies that are out there keep coming towards us, but we try it and see if it's going to work. We listen to other farmers. We try to gather information to see what would fit into our fields to constantly build our sustainable story and to be productive. Also, about 20 years, we started doing rotational grazing. So you may ask, what's rotational grazing? Well, we have about 200 cows, and so we turn them out on grasslands. And if you turn them out in a big pasture, they'll continually go back to a same area and eat that grass that keeps growing. Once a grass gets mature, it gets don't have near the nutrients in it, don't taste quite as good. So by doing a sectionalized rotational plan, we I shouldn't say really make them, but we control those areas better, that they are maximizing all those acres. So it's just another way that we are trying to control our natural resources to the best we can. 10 years ago, we started using biodiesel. And then we also started a really I did want to go back. 20 years ago, we did go to cover crops too. We initially started with them. That was the original initially starting. 10 years ago, we started getting into it a little bit more, seeing the benefits of reduced resistant weeds, less erosions again, and then also noticing that our organic matter, it had an effect on that. And that's a real important soil condition that our crops need to maximize production. We also started paying attention to what cover crops 20 years ago, we were just throwing rye out there, because that's what we were all being told to use. And we were all trying to experience what it was going to, what the benefits was. During that period, we found out that using brassicas like turnips and radishes help soil compactions in areas. And then also, like Nancy had said, the legumes started putting nutrients back in our ground that our row production crops needed. So that helped also reduce the price of inputs on those row crops. We also did a measurement of our soil on water, the water holding capacity. Well, you might ask, well, what do you need to know that for? Well, about 40% of my crops is under an irrigation. And by allowing us to measure that water holding capacity, I'm able to speed up in areas where the water is held in the soil for a longer period of time. So I don't need to put in as much water in those areas. But then there's areas where the soil doesn't hold the water very much. So then I need to kind of slow it down. It takes about 72 hours to make a full circle on one pivot. That technology we bought in that pivot to be able to put in those charts to where it automatically does it. It speeds up in certain areas and then also it slows down. So that allows us, again, to maximize our natural resources. I think that's the main story I want to bring out in my sustainable story over the years is that, I'm just trying to not have a heavy footprint, but yet still trying to maximize production with what natural resources I have. And I do not want to deplete them for the next generation coming, which hopefully is my son and my grandsons. So back here 5 years ago, we also added some more new technology, which we started planting all our crops in 15-inch rows. You might say, well, how does that do? What's that do for you? Well, it makes my ground canopy much faster. If corn most generally is put on 30-inch rows. So I get a faster canopy on my soil of about 2 weeks. Now, you wouldn't think 2 weeks makes much difference, but it does because that seed needs heat and sunlight to sprout. And if I can get that canopy on the ground, it's less likely for grasses and broadleaves to sprout. So what that really does is a couple things. I use less chemical. I use less fuel. I use less labor. And I use less equipment because I don't have to go out there and spray again. So that's fuel and chemical and labor. And my equipment cost is less. So hopefully you can grab a couple of these points and hopefully you understand and maybe enjoy that a little bit. Our story is constantly evolving, like many new products. You got to try it a little bit and keep making adjustments. And that's what sustainability means to me is the ability to invest, adjust, and still continue to leave good natural resources for future generations.
That's a great story of progressive practices, Ed, where you're always looking for a new way to do something better. And I understand we've talked before about the use of biologicals and technology, and you're working on a trial on your operation. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, so this year there's getting to be more and more talk about biologicals and what they can do for seed production or row crop production. And my friend of mine talked to me one day about putting this biological on my seed. And therefore, whenever I plant the seed, it's on that seed and it's out there already. And it needs to be out there as soon as it can. So anyway, yes, we did do that this year. We just did do a measurement of I did a side-by-side comparison of 120 rows, okay? 120 rows has the biological on, then the next 120 rows does not. And I did that 5 times. So anyway, we went out and did some measurement, and there was a biomass, a weight difference of 5 to 8% on the biological seed treatment compared to the non-treatment. And then there also was a measurement of the leaf, of its ability to capture photosynthesis. And that was up to 8 to 10% more. So we haven't harvested yet. I've been doing some walking. We did a visual side by side on plants, and the biological plant looked bigger. And so it's promising. I haven't harvested yet. I've been doing some walking, and in 15-inch rows, it's pretty hard to walk out there, but it's looking promising. We'll see when we yield. The wind turbines, that's a farm. A lot of our area farmers are looking for ways to, use our natural resources. Again, it's just maximizing our natural resources. And this farm here is about 80 miles west of me. And so out there, I have like 90 pair out there, and all that water, how they get water is done by windmills. So think about that. I got 90 head of cattle out there, and it's 100 degrees out there, and I'm relying on the wind to blow so they can get water. So anyway, that's why some of these wind turbines are showing up in those kind of areas. They're using a natural resource.
Great story, Ed. Thank you. And it really brings home the concept that technology of all different kinds is very, very fundamental to continuous sustainability improvements. So thank you so much. And now let's turn our attention to how biodiesel is used in practical ways. Let's talk with John Benish, a pioneer in using biodiesel in bus fleets. John, yours is a unique story. Tell us about your company and when you started using biodiesel in your bus fleets.
Sure, and good afternoon to everybody. So we're a family-owned and operated school bus contractor in the suburbs of Chicago, and the company was started back in the late 50s, early 60s. And it was started actually with my parents, partners, friend, our family. They had one son and needed some help. And along came my father coming from another job who was unrelated to the bus business. And then slowly but surely, they got started getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger around the Chicagoland area. We actually started transporting children to and from and in and out of the city in station wagons. And that's kind of how it started. And then, of course, that progressed into school buses. And then during the mid 60s up to the 70s, when you had a lot of the suburban blow-ups where a lot of people were moving out into the suburbs, that's when things really got busy. So through some school bus acquisitions of other family-owned companies, and also to starting some companies from scratch, we slowly got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. I started in the early 90s. I worked with my brother and my 3 brother-in-laws, and slowly but surely got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And right now we operate we should be operating about 2,200 vehicles each day in the suburbs and a little bit in the city of Chicago. So with that, as you see in the picture, 95% of that is yellow, and we transport primarily grade school children all the way up to high school and everything in between. As you see in this picture, we do quite a bit of special need transportation in smaller buses. We run about 60 to 65% of our buses or our vehicles we operate that are special needs children. And those children range from all different types, autistic children, paraplegic, quadriplegics. We do quite a bit of wheelchair Many of our buses have air conditioning because we do transport a lot of children with breathing difficulties. And so pretty much everything in between. That market in the area that we operate in Chicago has grown quite a bit. And again, like I said, we operate anywhere from 60 to 65% of our vehicles are special need vehicles. We started our biodiesel program in 2005. It was on a suggestion from one of our fuel providers. At the time, we were about almost 98 to 100% diesel fired vehicles. And we wanted to look for other ways to sort of clean up our tailpipes, clean up our yards, because at one of my jobs in the morning, as everybody knows, very early in the morning in Chicago, it gets quite cold in the winter. And so we'd fire up 50 to 75 vehicles, and you could see the amount of soot and black smoke coming from the tailpipes. So we were always looking for a better, easier way to sort of clean up our school bus environment, which is not only around the bus, but at the schools and inside the bus. And what we really liked about the opportunity is when we learned more about biodiesel is that, as mentioned, I think somebody else said it already today, is that you didn't really have to do any modifications to the bus at all. And that was really something that put a light bulb on for us, because we wanted to make sure we tried the product, but we also didn't want to modify all buses. You can imagine not just doing one bus, but if you had to modify a couple thousand buses, that's quite expensive and takes a lot of time. So when we found out biodiesel just runs on regular fired school buses and that we didn't have to make any modifications, it didn't do anything to our warranty. And we found out it's just as reliable as regular diesel fuel. We got quite excited. So we started with one or two companies, and then sooner or later we let that grow. And now we are fleet wide, and we use over, I think, 1.5 million, almost 2 million gallons of biodiesel each school year. We're just starting up the school year, obviously, as the last couple of weeks. And we run a mixture between B11, which is 11% biodiesel, soy-based, and B20, which is 20% of biodiesel. We run B20 365 days a year, 7 days a week at Midway Airport for a shuttle program that we provide. And and the benefits, like I said, no modification to the vehicle. I could use biodiesel all day long. And then if I have to go downstate, maybe where I can't get it, or on a field trip, I could go back to regular diesel. And then I could go back to using biodiesel. It burns cleaner. And we have noticed that when we do our own engine breakdowns, we have our own machine shop where we break down all our own engines, transmissions, and starters. So when we pull those engines apart, we really can look inside exactly to the walls, the piston walls, and see the wear and tear on the buses. And we've noticed that biodiesel adds a little bit more lubricity than regular diesel, especially when they went to the low sulfur diesel in the late 1990s. We had to find a way to put that lubricity back in, and that was done through biodiesel. And so that's a big push for us and a big help. So again, it helps on the inside of the environment of the bus. It's on the outside of the bus. As you see in this picture here, these buses are parked at a school. And again, when you line up a lot of buses and you get them close together, you see a noticeable difference. And obviously it reduces the harmful emissions around the school bus. And what better way or better use for us to make a very safe vehicle? The safest way to and from school is a school bus. But if we can find other ways to make it cleaner and safer for the children, it's just a great fit for us. And it works very well. The other thing that we like about it is that it's effective, it's cost effective. We do get a little bit of a tax break on it. And so in order to use something like this, it has to make financial sense, and it does. So we are a privately held company. We are charging the school districts, and so we have to be efficient. And because of the nature of the business and the amount of transport children, we transport over 100,000 children every morning and every afternoon. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of issues with that. There's traffic, there's weather, there's parents, there's late buses and things like that. we want to use a fuel and we want to make it effective on our buses. So we don't have to worry about that. There's a lot of things we have to worry about in the morning, starting buses, things breaking down, drivers showing up. The last thing we want to worry about is fuel. And so we've been very happy with it. I wouldn't endorse the product unless we really thought that it worked. It's a great fit. I also found out that Illinois, the state of Illinois, is one of the largest producer of soybeans by state in the country. And so what a great thing to do if you can have a renewable energy just in your own state, and something that's effective as biodiesel. So it's been a really good fit for us.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much. Well, we've got some questions coming in. So why don't we turn to Q&A for just a bit. We've got a couple of questions that came in before the webinar started. One is for Veronica and maybe one of our farmers to answer. How does the production of biodiesel impact the food supply?
Sure, thanks, Melanie. I think that's a fair question. And I would suggest that biodiesel doesn't really impact the food supply itself. So at the beginning of my kind of presentation, I showed the slide about the different feedstocks that go into making biodiesel. And if you think of, the tallow or used cooking oil or corn oil, they're all considered kind of byproducts or waste products of the food chain. And soy or canola would be, more of a co-product. And they all, provide additional support for farmers. And the production, I know for soy, is really driven by the demand for protein and not so much for the demand for oil itself. And that ends up actually making the protein more affordable.
All right. Ed, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Melanie, I'd be happy to. Yeah, Veronica brings up a really good point. The byproduct of soybeans is oil and soybean meal. And soybean meal is a vital part of animal ag production. And in animal ag production, you have input cost, right? So that affects their market and whether they're going to survive or produce more or cut back. So I see this additional demand for the soybean oil is really helping out the animal ag sector in their production costs. So that and not only that, there's other really great benefits that, how do you monetize, or what's the measurement of cleaner air, less repair costs, or reliance on foreign oil products? So multiple questions. I'm excited about it, and I do see the benefit on many aspects of that. Thank you.
All right, great. Our next question is for our farmers. As a farmer, what kind of questions do you get from consumers about biodiesel? And do you find that there's misinformation out there about biodiesel?
Yeah, Melanie, I think we kind of touched a little bit on that. Some of the questions I get is, is it safe? Is it reliable? And I can just look back in history, and American farmers always produce a reliable and safe product. Now, there are some natural resources like weather that can make a difference and the amount of production. So those are kind of controls that we don't have. But as the American farmer, we continually invest in innovation and seed production, new genetics. I mean, there's just the safe and reliable products. Other questions I get, and some of these questions are from local people that I get, is it available? Yes, it is getting more and more available. Does it gel your fuel up in the cold weather? No, it doesn't. Just like all new products, when they first hit the market, there's a little bit of issues or stuff that we got to work through. What are the benefits to the motor components? All those things. What really excites me is that I'm able to use it, and it allows me to reduce my carbon footprint. So that's the basic, what I want to make sure everybody's aware of, that, as a sustainable farmer, I also need to raise production, but I need to do it with less. And part of that is carbon. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so we're running out of time. So we're going to ask you if you could just take a quick minute to do a quick survey for us. And if you can hang with us, I'll ask one more question of John while you're doing the survey. The survey link is in the chat. And so please go and just complete a really quick survey while I ask John this question, which is, John, Chicago is really, really cold. Do you ever have any issues with your buses running using biodiesel?
So yeah, I mean, we've had issues with just regular diesel and biodiesel because either we've gotten some fuel or some fuel that was not quality. It was not the quality we were supposed to get, or we have water in our tanks, and that is a rare thing that happens. But because we're diligent, like anybody, you know, for regular diesel tanks and any kind of tanks, we are very diligent about making sure we clean our tanks out at least once a year. We use a water dispersant to make sure we get rid of the water, because water is the enemy in any type of diesel. But, you know, rarely does it ever happen. And again, we've had issues with just regular diesel. You always have to be careful of what you're buying, because the diesel and any type of fuel for your vehicle is the bloodline of your vehicle. So as long as you're watching it and you're careful with what you use, just like you would your own car, we are very careful on what kind of diesel we use in our biodiesel, and we've been very happy with it. But like anything else, as long as you keep an eye on it and make sure you keep the water out, it has been fine for us.
And I wish we had more time to talk about it, but John's also doing a trial with B100 this year. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that another time. So thank you, everyone. Before we wrap up, please try to get that survey done. And on behalf of USB and CFI, thank you for joining us today. A huge thank you to our panelists, Veronica, Nancy, Ed, and John, for their insights into a fuel that can play an important role in food chain sustainability. And we will, in the future, send everyone who signed up for this webinar a link to a recording as well. So thank you, everyone, and good afternoon.